So one of the things that came up in that, and I'm just setting up this big story so that it's a question to you, I promise. But I, one of the issues that came up when I was interviewing these activists in the 90s is that at some point there were layoffs in the late 80s, early 90s. There were layoffs across all the big offices in Chicago. And who were the first to go? They were the women and people of color. They were the most vulnerable positions in the offices. And so when recession came, they realized they were out of luck. They organized this exhibition. They made this little group. And then all of a sudden, what happened? The economy picked up again. And then suddenly everyone's back to work. And then there's no time to sit around agitating anymore. And I wanted to think about that. I just wonder if you guys have also seen patterns, in waves of activism.
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah. And I thought about that a lot for today because I knew you were thinking about it. But when I first read your question, I immediately thought of the book Backlash, which was written in the 1990s. So for me personally, it was this culmination of things. It was like where I was working, and many of my friends, even in 1993, there were some layoffs. Like a lot of my friends got laid off, So because I came out after the recession you were talking about I was still in school then. But anyway, the early 90s, so sort of like, so I guess there was the repercussion of that previous recession. There was Anita Hill. There was Backlash, which is a book written by Susan Faludi. And so for me, I was really affected by those two things. And then there was Carrie, and then there was where I was working. So it was like this confluence of things. And then as I mentioned, so I started to seek out these historic women because I wanted women role models, and I didn't know any. And so it was a little funny to go backwards to like Eileen Gray or Sophia Hayden, who was the woman who did the Women's Pavilion here in Chicago. To dig up their stories was on the one hand depressing. But it was also inspiring because that gave me that perspective of like, that was when I started to know how long change takes. So then you have that perspective of how long it took women to get the vote, But the backlash, so I went back and why does backlash happen? Because it seems to me like the cycle is you'll have a very progressive period like the 70s, feminism, all of this stuff. And then you hit the 80s and it's a backlash period. Maybe that led into the 90s. And we're in one now. And, we're in a backlash period right now. So there you could say, under Obama in this country, we have all these progressive things happening. And now we are in a backlash I never imagined I would see in my lifetime. And when I connected with Sarah had asked for a history of CWA. And so I sent her my chapter and I wrote to you. I'm like, I hadn't really thought about it. It's been almost 15, I hate to think, it's been 15 years since I wrote the chapter. It was, maybe 12 years. The book came out in 2005. So I said to Sarah, I'm like, I think that the chapter is more relevant today than it was when it was published. And I never would have thought that would be the future of my writing that piece. It's, so I don't know why it happens. I mean, it's a bit, I don't really have the answer, but I'm saying there's definitely a pattern. And I think it's tied to I don't know why, but the period of progression and then a backlash for some reason. Is that human nature? I hate to think it's human nature. I mean, why do we do that?
I wish I could answer that question.
I want to mention too, since Carrie has mentioned, and I also attended that event, was in 1993, right, here in Chicago. It was one of the organizers was a woman named Sally Levine, who now lives in Cleveland, correct? Okay. The graphic that's up there at the very top on that wall, the very top of the panel that's in red and blue, was a fantastic graphic, and maybe I gravitated to it being of Greek background. It's in the Caryatids. Well, they did a black and white version. It was a postcard, the invitation. Do you remember that, Susan?
Yeah.
Well, I still have that on my desk. It's never moved the entire time. In Champaign-Urbana, it must have been on really good paper. It didn't fade, didn't move, didn't self-destruct. But I look at that all the time, more than the sum of our body parts. It was really, really catchy, and the whole exhibit was really, really well done. It was just beautiful graphics, models, this and that. And I think I, being more of the authored verbal type than the visual type, but I can really appreciate really good visuals, really good graphics, and the power they have to convey a message. So, I may write a book like this one that my more recent book, Defined by Design. Each book that I've written seems to take about 10 years to write. And, a lot of energy, a lot of time. And I admire people who can do really good graphics really quickly, but convey a message that may say the same thing as what you say in here, but get it across to a lot more people a lot faster.
Right.
And I think that's what that Carrie exhibit really did.
And it was funny.
It was very funny. It had humor with it.
Yes, you guys should try it. I don't know.
It
There's
did.
the catalog around the corner too.
Yes, so
I think that gives a good sense.
We do. We have an original catalog from that exhibition, which you see in that panel up there with the red tassel and the blue background, which has those caryatids, which are actually representative of the women of Carrie, who were captured by the Greeks and sentenced to a lifetime of servitude, holding up the entablature of a building. They turned that graphic into you see those caryatids sort of facing in the same direction in a position of power. I think that's sort of the graphic that was compelling to you. I think it still stands. So you have a chance to review that. You can flip through that catalog if you want. And one of my favorite things to talk about in relation to that exhibition, which I think still is relevant to what you guys are up to today, they wrote, I'm going to pull a trick from Susan's book and read a little bit, but I promise it won't be that much. It's I just want to talk about that exhibition was a challenge to the AIA. We were talking about, how we deal with change in the profession and how our institutions respond. That exhibition was organized as a counter exhibition to the AIA convention here, which was headed by the first woman president of the national AIA, the national president of the National American Institute of Architects, sort of our biggest club for the non-architects in the room. So it was an art exhibition. It wasn't architecture on display, but they wrote a letter to Susan Maximin that says that the AIA had ignored the following issues: the wage gap, the glass ceiling, family leave policies, gender bias and treatment on the job, sexual harassment in the workplace, family workplace issues, and attrition rates. And through this exhibition, we challenged the AIA to formulate specific programs and policies to address these issues. So I guess this is I'm also going to throw another big question at you guys, and I guess to you guys too, the current leadership. How do you see national, do you see progress on these issues, or how do you measure progress, and how do you continue to push on these issues that are especially relevant to women?
Go ahead.
I mean, I would say that in this research that I've in some ways dedicated myself to and understanding the history of NOMA, when you go back through the archives, they're pretty well documented, but it's mostly men. Even throughout NOMA, you see lots and lots. It was originally NOBA, so it was a Black Architects organization, and it was just lots of Black men, and then once in a while you'd see a woman splashed in there. And I specifically, in putting together graphics, I would always pick the picture with the one woman. And now our national NOMA president is a woman. Our iNOMA e-board is, I want to say, 4 out of 6 people are women. I would say we're more organized now. But I think there is change. I don't know who am I to decide that, but I suppose just in seeing that, there are pictures and there are things that have happened previously. Even looking at our leadership from last year in iNOMA, that was almost entirely men. But then you always have the women who are around and very reliable and who are there. And then this year we have a much larger. So maybe that is change. It feels good to just see it at least in pictures. It's something trackable. I'm not sure how that's measured.
I know, just
historic. Oh, go ahead.
Hearing just horror stories, it's not that bad for me. I mean, as it was for some women, but there's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of articles, and it's really hard to find quality content nowadays. And I feel like there are new sources that are putting out quality content, and there are exhibitions and people trying really hard. So you would hear there would be a few times where a few years where nothing would happen, and then all of a sudden these things would start happening, kind of like what's happening nowadays. But it's really getting hard to sort through the noise. And I feel like sometimes the quality of the content is getting a lot better than it was. So I think that's how I would measure. I don't think I said that right how I was thinking, but I would say there's progress.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, but Catherine, you've done a lot with the numbers. I don't know if you're still tracking them. I feel like you had been a resource to me at different points.
I have from time to time, but what I was going to say also is, I think given NOMA, many of you probably know, but the national conference was held, the national convention was held right here in Chicago last fall in October. Broke all records. They were expecting 600 people. 900 showed up. They had to get more food. They had to get more tables, more chairs for the banquet at the Palmer House. The way the conference was set up was great because it didn't all take place at the hotel. It also took place. Sharon Samuels, who's here with us this evening, was one of the organizers. It was one of the best conventions I'd ever been to. Extremely well organized, or at least appeared that way to us as participants. You behind the scenes maybe would think differently, but for us it was like magic. How all of a sudden, so many people came from all over the country, all over the world, and heard about the success stories of what people were doing, not only in the U.S. but across the globe, who were so-called minority architects and really influencing the quote majority architects now in a very significant way. So I think Chicago and the event that happened here last year really put NOMA on the map internationally in a way that perhaps it hadn't been before. So I think you can't ignore that as part of the local history. NOMA made a huge splash in the city in a way it just had not done before, and it's really commendable.
You actually reminded me that with the Chicago Architecture Center also, there's an initiative now to track all of the different ways in which different organizations are trying to improve diversity in the fields of architecture and design. And a lot of these, including our own Project Pipeline, go about this by reaching out to schools and neighborhoods where kids wouldn't even know what architecture is. But that's not unique to Project Pipeline. We actually learned through this report that the Chicago Architecture Center published, and it is available online. I'm happy to share it with anyone. But there are over 35 organizations, profitable and nonprofit, throughout Chicago that are trying to extend knowledge about architecture and design professions to children, specifically through camps, through workshops in schools. And I think that is a number. Those are numbers. And they've gone through and actually created a very detailed report about who are the students that they're reaching, where are they located, what does that mean in terms of the income levels that the children's families fall into, and that there is a lot to track about how much Chicago is making an effort. And I think that is the place to see change. And then as we start to see how these organizations learn about each other, that's when you're going to get a movement that bubbles up. I think even with our new political leadership here in the city, that's how we're going to start to see this change. So thank you for bringing up the conference, because I find myself referencing this report once in a while, and I think it's just really important that these are not one-off efforts anymore, and I think that's the biggest way that you see change.
Yeah.
I would also say too, back to your question about the cycles, okay, and why do these things seem to go in cycles? I think also there's certain turning points in the news that occur every so often that put these issues in the limelight. I mean, they're always around, they've always been there, but certain things happen. So recently, obviously, the Me Too movement, which came to light a few years ago now. Did we all know there was sexual harassment before that? Yes. Was it called something else way back in the past? Yes. Did it have a name before? Way before? No. But people just knew it happened. But in any case, the fact that the Me Too movement, the feminist movement. There have been many, many movements, large movements, major movements, mini movements, but that have made national headlines on a scale that weren't just, not just for architects, but for women in all professions and non-professions that really brought these issues to the fore. So I think that's partly, and as you say, with every movement that's happened, there's also been a backlash. I think the backlash of the Me Too, for better or for worse, I think a lot of our male counterparts may be afraid to travel with us or meet with us behind closed doors, or they're afraid of being accused of something, or afraid to. I had one colleague a few years ago. He said, "Kathy, you look very nice in that dress, but maybe I shouldn't be telling you that." And I thought, well, it didn't bother me. I thought it was nice that he said I looked good in the dress. I took it as a compliment, but he was afraid to give a compliment because he thought I'd turn him in. So, we're dealing with that kind of thing where people are walking on eggshells or tiptoeing around and not trusting us. And that's another problem in itself. So that's, again, we talk about cycles.
Just an answer to the movement, because because these are things that we were expected to keep quiet about previously, and the fact that people, even if it does mean walking on eggshells for a little bit, at least you're thinking about it, because I think a lot of times the things that are now seen as harassment were like, oh, that's just a woman, it's okay. So I mean, I think that walking on eggshells is kind of good and part of